Today on the Roundhouse, we are talking about one of the most famous ocean liners in history and how it's being preserved in virtual reality. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to The Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode number 69 of our Boats and Sailing podcast, where we're talking about everything that sails on the ocean. Oh, no, wait, that's right. We're a train podcast. So why are we talking about the Titanic? Well, I'll tell you why. We are interviewing Mr. Tom Lynskey, who is one of the project developers for Titanic: Honor and Glory, which is a new video game / simulator being developed that recreates the fateful voyage and goes to incredible lengths to recreate every single piece of the ship. Now, this is a development that I've been following out of my own personal interest, and by what I've seen them do, there's a lot of research and a lot of work that they're doing that is very much related to what we can be doing in rail preservation. So I figured that this would be an interesting episode in that we can learn something from a preservation effort that is different from what we're used to, but has a lot of remarkably similar elements. And how can we find ways of bringing this to lost railroads and history that we want to communicate with the general public? So that is why I have invited Tom on the show, and I think you'll find his stories very interesting, and I'll have links in the show notes for everything that we're talking about as far as the demo of the game, which you can download and try. Links in the show notes for episode number 69. Before we get to him, though, I want to thank Mr. Andrew Dillman. He has signed up on Patreon as part of the Roundhouse crew. He is a loco fitter, meaning that he gets early access to podcast episodes before they are released for the general public. So if you're able to take that $2 a month that you'd ordinarily spend on an expensive cup of coffee and put it towards the Roundhouse and helping us to grow the show and cover really interesting events, especially coming up in 2018, that would mean so much to me. I really appreciate everyone who's been able to make donations and join our Patreon so far. You can learn more about how that works at patreon.com/theroundhouse. If ever there was someone who was to raise the Titanic, it would be this man and his team of programmers, researchers, you name it, and they're learning everything they can about this ship to create Titanic: Honor and Glory, which will be quite the simulation experience of the famous ocean liner. He's the co-producer, director, and writer for this game. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Tom Lynskey.
Hey, Nick, how's it going? It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you on the show. Now, to get this out of the way, yes, this is a trade podcast and we're talking about a boat, but you are going to have a trade in the game. Is that correct?
We're going to have a few trains, actually. Quite a few trains. Well, let's see. We've got the boat train from London to Southampton, which is the train that a lot of the passengers were on, which was historically accurate. It really existed. We've been tracing it down and recreating the train cars as best as we can. We've been, we've even been looking up some of the numbers that were put onto the carriages. There's cargo trains, and first off, I do have to apologize here. There's going to be a lot of train terminology I'm sure that you and your listeners are going to be very familiar with. I'm not. So I apologize in advance for that. I believe the dock trains are called shunters. Am I right there?
You're talking about having steam locomotives that move around on the port and the quay that are moving little freight cars around, right?
Exactly. So we have that in addition to the boat train that was on the London Southwestern Railway line. And then we've also got, well, we're considering doing the French boat train from Paris to Cherbourg, which carried passengers as well, and perhaps even the Irish boat train from Dublin to Cove, or Queenstown, as it was called back then. So in addition to trams, if you want to count those as trains, they were railed at the time. We've got a number of trains and railed vehicles that we're including in this project.
So this is part of where you get to see how these guys are going beyond just the ship. It seems like this is more than just the ship. It is recreating the time and the world in which the ship existed.
Absolutely. Not just with trains, but everything we possibly can think of that is within our means and capabilities. We're recreating a part of the city of Southampton, which you can explore, go inside some of the buildings, the hotels, the shops, and talk to some of the people there. What we really want to do is we want to create the backdrop of 1912 so that when you finally board the ship, it's not just a ship in some generic time period in history, which you kind of get that impression from a lot of the movies. Here you get the opportunity to understand what 1912 was. We kind of dive into the political situations of the time. We talk about the current events, the positives, the negatives, and we really want people to feel like this is a real world, give them the context, and then put them on the ship. So that's the plan there.
Let's take a step all the way back and first answer the question, what is Titanic, Honor and Glory?
All right, well, it is a video game. We kind of feel uncomfortable using the term video game because it, when we're dealing with such a tragic subject as the Titanic, to call it a video game sounds relatively tasteless or disrespectful. But it is basically a video game, although we are doing this as respectfully as possible. I'll explain the premise to you. You are a Oxford University student who is framed for murder and robbery, is arrested, and during his interrogation finds that the real culprits, the ones who have framed him, are escaping England on the Titanic. So you have to get away and you have to board the ship and prove your innocence. You make friends along the way, you explore the ship, you gather clues, and then just as you're putting it together, the ship hits the iceberg and collides with its destiny and begins sinking in real time. So it's a video game, and our objective with it is to teach people of all generations, anyone who wants to play it, the story of the Titanic, who the people on board were, because all of the characters, with the exception of the lead character and the bad guys, are real, and teach them how it unfolded. So it's a simulation with a storyline, I want to say. That's the best way to explain the structure of this project. And we are building the entire ship inside and out as accurately as humanly possible. We're working with the top historians, a lot of the ones who worked with James Cameron on his film and his documentaries. We're working with the people who regularly worked with the artifacts and who have dived the wreck on several occasions, who know the ship like the back of their hand. If some of the listeners here know the Titanic and know some of these names, especially if they've watched the recent National Geographic documentary or some of the others, we've got Ken Marshall, the famous maritime artist. We have Park Stevenson, Bill Sauter, and everyone is just contributing to make this a very thoroughly accurate representation of both the Titanic and just 1912 in general.
So let's look at the aspect of reconstructing the ship first, because obviously it is the centerpiece for all this. How did you get involved with such a massive scope of project, and how does one begin researching this enormous entity and myth and everything that surrounds it as a legend?
It kind of started on a personal note. Almost everyone in the team, or at the very least everyone who was in our core inner circle of the team, we all grew up with this fascination for the Titanic and history in general. We always wanted to know what it would be like to walk the decks or talk to the different people, or what those final moments would have been like. So one of our teammates started just building models of the Titanic digitally, digital models, so that he could walk around and explore it himself. Another one of our teammates started that way, and I had always made films. I did one about the Titanic, and I met these guys, and then with my writing and with their modeling, we got together and we said, hey, you know what? Let's make this a game. Let's make this a product we can share with people. And then it kind of grew from there. We reached out to a few historians who had helped me with my films in the past, and they were very happy to come on board. And then it just kind of kept growing. We did a few online fundraisers. We didn't hit our goal, but our goals were extremely high. We did make a lot, and that's been helpful. And then we're seeking investors at this point. It's kind of just grown. We want it to be a real game, which we can spread with a lot of people and not just like a little indie title or an app or something like that. So it's grown into what we think is a respectable size that will honor those who are on board.
What adventures have you been on in your quest to gather all of this research? I've seen your YouTube channel, and you've been to everything from the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California, to the, have to forgive me if I get this detail wrong, but I believe the dining room in the UK that uses siding from the Olympics dining room. Am I correct on that?
We've been to a lot of different places over the course of this project. Some of it has been specifically for the project, meaning we have gone to a place on a research trip or on a business trip so that we could learn or help gain the resources needed for the project. Some of our trips have been kind of like business partnership trips. Like sometimes there's a third party group that will say, hey, we would love to commission you or get your help from your project. Could you come out and meet us? And with that, we've gone to Prague. I've gone to Sweden. There's been a lot of traveling there. And then some of the trips have been just people would call us up and say, would you be willing to come here and give a talk about this project and show off your work for our convention or for our meetup? For example, 6 months ago, I was brought up to Halifax, Nova Scotia to give a talk on the Titanic with my business partner at the Maritime Museum. And I'm still here calling you from there. Actually, what happened is I met a girl on that trip, and she's my girlfriend, and I'm visiting her. But I am calling you from there. So as far as travels and adventures, and I'll elaborate on that first category in a moment, the research trips. But as far as adventures that this has taken us on, it's really been exciting and never would have expected it. It's been a lot of fun. These trips are covered out of our own personal money. We want to make that very clear that this is our own, kind of like our own contribution to getting this going off the ground. As far as research trips, we've gone to the Queen Mary. You saw that on our YouTube. That was a combined business partnership with research trip. We went to the ship because the Queen Mary was built, I think, in 1929. So only about 20 years after the Titanic. And we got to explore it and go throughout it. We spent a few nights on board measuring and taking all sorts of reference photos because it was built in Scotland, I believe. And like I said, 20 years after the Titanic was built, a lot of the same construction methods. It was the same type of ship overall. So we were able to just use it as this wonderful reference that we could touch and explore. We did a research trip through Britain, which took us to all sorts of museums, and it let us meet with a bunch of historians and descendants of people who were actually on board the Titanic. We met with a relative of J. Bruce Ismay, who was the owner of the Titanic. As you said, we visited the White Swan Hotel, which is in Alnwick, England, up near the border of Scotland. And they have, as their dining room, it's the original fittings that were auctioned off when they scrapped the RMS Olympic, which was the nearly identical sister ship to the Titanic, which did not sink. In fact, it had a very prosperous career. But it was the interior lounge for first class that the hotel owners in the 30s bought, and then installed into their hotel, and it's beautiful. We get to basically enter a complete full room from the Olympic and take all sorts of photographs and measurements and any sort of research we might need. My friend Matt, who is doing the main interior models of the ship, he locked himself in that room basically from the moment he woke up till the time he went to sleep, just measuring and taking photos and taking notes and doing little sketches. There's all sorts of information out there, and it's through things like this that are ensuring that we get this right and make sure that our recreations are authentic and as spot on as we possibly can, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners can appreciate, because when they're doing a train simulator, I'm sure they want to know that the train is right, that the details of the train that they're playing or using, that it's not something that the modeler just kind of winged or made up, that this is actually what driving the real train would have been like. So it's really the same thing. It's just a different subject.
Well, that's the thing. It crosses over in so many ways. I mean, yes, certainly with train simulators, the route developers and content creators are attempting to use this to recreate that feeling. But you'll see that level of attention to detail in authors who are writing books about a particular railway, maybe from the 1800s, where there's not a lot of it left. So they have to take whatever pieces exist to create the full puzzle of what this was and create a profile based off of that. Or you have model makers. I mean, you look at the work that James Cameron had to do in building his models for his 1997 epic. It's like that with model railroading, where companies go to these lengths to make sure they get every nut and rivet right on the tender of a steam locomotive, so that somebody who models that railroad in their basement feels like this is an authentic part of the world that they're trying to build. And in the course of that research, you realize how many people were affected by this particular entity. I mean, I think the most easy parallel to draw as far as fame in railroading history and general knowledge would probably be the construction of the U.S. Transcontinental Railroad. But even you look at niche subjects, there's still towns and cities that were so largely affected by this entity and its history that when you're retracing that, you get to meet the people who had ancestors who were affected by it. You get to see the relics, the remnants, and the souvenirs, and it makes it that much more realistic for you who are following in the footsteps of those before you.
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the cool things about the Queen Mary. It's not the Titanic. It's not even the same company of the Titanic, and it's not even the same decade. But it is one of the very, very last ships from that time period. It's certainly the last ship of that size, unless you want to make the stretch and say the SS United States in Philadelphia, although that was the 50s and 60s. The Queen Mary is the only surviving relic of the approximate era and the approximate size of the Titanic. So going out and visiting it, yeah, it's a hotel. It's just a shadow of what it once was, but it makes the ship feel a lot more real because we can walk its corridors. We can go to one end and we can look aft along one of the passenger corridors, and we can see the ship's shear, which is the bowing that they would build into it so that it flexes in the waves, or it rolls the waves a little better. We can feel what it's like to turn a ship's door handle at the time. It's these little things that you wouldn't think of, or even maybe as I'm describing it, it might not sound all that exciting, but when you're modeling these in the game, you get a good feeling for like what the weight is. You get a good feeling for, what sort of resistance would it be like to push this door open, or how do the lights glow? Just these silly little things. I'll tell you one thing about the Queen Mary. I never realized how heavy portholes are. For one, if you have an outboard cabin and you stay overnight, you can unlatch the portholes, and they're massive and they're heavy. You don't really realize that when you're just looking at drawings and reference photos of the Titanic and then you just digitally model it. going to the Queen Mary or handling some sort of artifact really brings it to life. So like the museums that carry the artifacts, some of those are really incredible because they actually are the real things we're building. They actually are the real one-off, only copy in the world examples of what we are building. It's nice that there are these specific things that still do exist that we can visit and in some cases handle and photograph and measure. So the research going into this, it really benefits whenever we have one of these hands-on examples that we can play with.
One of the things I've been curious about is, while you've been conducting this research and going to these great lengths, is there anything that you've discovered that not even previous historians had realized? Were there certain pieces that you were able to put together that unlocked these new doors of knowledge?
Actually, there's been an incredible amount of stuff that was discovered. But before I go into that, I want to just explain something first. This isn't all me. There's been a lot of discoveries that some of them I'm going to tell you about, but they're not my discoveries. Some of them are, but the beautiful recreations that you see and the majority of the research going into this are being done by my team. We have Matt, who is doing the interior modeling, as I mentioned, for the most part. We have Kyle, who is doing the exterior, and he's doing a lot of the engine conversions of the interiors. They're the ones who are making discoveries left and right. But then we've also got our historians, who my team is relying on constantly, in daily contact with. So there have been a lot of discoveries that Matt specifically has made, and I can pin it to him. And there have been some that Kyle has specifically made, and I can give him 100% of the credit. There's even been one or two that I've made, which I'm kind of proud of, but there's been a lot that are team efforts, where one person sees something in working on a model for the game, and it kind of just raises an eyebrow, and then they mention it to the group, and then it bounces back and forth, and we have time to kind of mull over it, and then we realize, hey, this is new. No one's ever noticed this before, and this is not what everyone has expected. One of the things that Matt and Ken and a few of the others discovered, mostly Matt actually, is there's a bulkhead on D-deck between the first class reception room and the first class dining room, which it was photographed extensively on the almost identical sister ship, the Olympic. And it has these 5 archways on the Olympic, but it was never photographed on the Titanic. And in the wreck site, that room is just obliterated. So there's no actual references for what the Titanic's bulkhead there looked like, and it was never a doubt. Everyone until our project just assumed it's identical to the Olympic. But Matt took the one and only photograph of the room. You can't see that bulkhead, but you can see a tiny shadow in the far off corner, and it's not quite right for the way that those arches should be. And then he started researching it and digging into it and heavily analyzing the photo, and then discovered that it's really just 3 wide arches instead of the 5 small arches. This is one of those nice examples that I really like to bring up because it had a very clean starting point and a very clean ending point. We knew exactly what everyone thought it was, and we thought it was that up until we found this. And then we had a very nice sequence to figuring it out and researching it, and then we had a very definitive end result where we were able to sketch out and build this new design. And we and our historians are very confident that this is what that wall really looked like. Now, I know it's just a wall inside the ship. It's important to us because we want it all to be right, but it doesn't sound so exciting to people who don't care so much about the Titanic or who aren't as interested. But there have been other discoveries specifically regarding some of the people. For one thing that I have to say is very beneficial is that we get a lot of incredible support from the descendants of people who were on the Titanic, both victims and survivors. As I was saying earlier, it sounds kind of tasteless to be making a video game out of this, but I want to say that we have had unanimous support from every descendant who we've talked to, we have actually had the time to sit down and had a conversation with. We've had unanimous support from them about doing this project because they realize it's about honoring them. So as a result, they reach out to us and they say, hey, look, here's this little journal entry that our ancestor who was on the Titanic wrote. It was never published. We never showed it to anyone, put it to good use. So we're able to get some information like this, and that just adds into the puzzle, the massive puzzle of the Titanic itself. And it gives us these few extra pieces, so we're able to see the overall picture a little clearer than most people have before. And this has led to certain discoveries that no one has really ever put together in the past that I'm aware of. And these are very trivial things. For example, just what someone had going through their head at a certain time, or why minor decisions were made. So, like I said, it does sound trivial, but for these people who were on board, this was everything in their world at the time. So it is very important, especially to us when we want to get the story spot on. So there have been a lot of discoveries that the team has made just from this.
And what do all of these details lead up to, you who are joining us might ask? Well, the first time that I installed one of their demos of this simulator on my computer, I think it was demo number 2, and I had my girlfriend join me, and we were there. We loaded the game, and we were on the ship. We were on it. Every little detail adds up to this whole world. Now, and even the demo, we're just talking areas like the grand staircase and just looking into one of the first class dining rooms. We're not even talking about the whole ship yet. We're talking about a section of it, and yet that section felt so thorough. And that makes the difference when you're trying to communicate that history. It doesn't feel like things are being glossed over, skipped to just get to the whole piece. It shows the significance of how everybody's contribution matters. And even where some of those contributions, such as the diary entries you mentioned, aren't going to tell you the color of the carpet per se, they contribute in an important way that may not immediately be visible, but absolutely makes a difference when you're trying to make this the definitive historical text in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every little last detail is important to us, and that's one of the things that we really pride ourselves on. The details in the way people act and their personal stories, so that you can feel like this is real, so that you really understand the weight of the events that night, but also the little details on the models and in the world itself. We have on every single wall inside the ship, you can walk up to it and you can see the paintbrush strokes on the wall, or you could see the wood grain. The wood carvings are all as accurate as possible, and it's for the entire ship. So we do feel strongly that the details are what is bringing this to life. The details in the people and the details in the environment. And then later on, the details in how it all unfolds and how the story plays. The way people act and how they react to every little thing as it unfolds. And it will unfold in real time during the syncing. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for these details to really bring this to life and help people understand what history was and what happened there.
Your story is a very interesting choice, too, because it's not highlighting the Titanic's significance in and of itself. It's immersing you into this world of England, 1912, and you are a character, and then you board the Titanic, but you as the character have no way of knowing that this is going to be one of the greatest tragedies of the early 20th century. You just know that you're boarding the Titanic because you're on this mission. So you can still, as a person playing the character, be in awe of the world that's surrounding you, but that awe isn't overshadowing what people didn't realize. It's not doing too much foreshadowing of, oh, this is going to be a significant thing. It's trying to humanize the story, if I understand your intentions.
We're really trying to downplay the foreshadowing as best as we can. The Titanic was on its 4th day of its voyage It set sail on April 10th from Southampton, England, jumped over to Cherbourg, France on that evening, and then Queenstown, Ireland the following morning. And then it didn't start sinking until 20 minutes before midnight on April 14th, and then it went down on the 15th. So it was on its fourth day of its voyage, and we're giving every single one of these days like a full storyline. That there's a lot of time devoted to these days. You feel the voyage. You don't just jump to the sinking. It's not just like, hey, let's get to the exciting part and do this. You feel every part of the voyage. It feels like this is just a normal voyage up until that happens. And when it does finally start to sink, in real life, most of the people on board had absolutely no idea what was going on. In fact, it took 45 minutes for the officers to realize the ship is indeed sinking. They thought it was just damaged. Passengers didn't know what was going on. There was mass confusion in the beginning because they were being told, you got to get into these lifeboats, you got to row away from the ship, but you'll be back by morning. So there was all sorts of confusion, and the people telling them this, the sailors, they actually believed that. So efforts are being made on our part in writing this to try to simulate that. Yeah, we know everyone's going to pick up the game and say it's the Titanic. There's going to be a sinking in it, obviously. But we're trying to work with that. We're trying to put the effort in to downplay it in the beginning so that it kind of does hit you in the same way that it hit the people on board.
What's also quite incredible about it, which you allude to there, is that it's very, very slow. And to demonstrate this, a couple of years ago, you published a video on YouTube of the ship sinking in real time. So you see it hit the iceberg, but nothing happens, at least not to the naked eye. And it's a while before you start to see the bow taking on serious amounts of water. And that length of time feels like an eternity. And then when you start to hear the screams and you realize that there's a danger to it, it's still an eternity. That captures the disaster in a way that nothing else quite could. As many people would say, some of the great movies of the past in trying to replicate certainly the moments of fear, but there's a lot more to it than just that. And just to highlight how successful their video was, guys, it has 24 million hits on YouTube. So you know these guys are doing it right.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We actually did not expect that. It was coming up on the anniversary, and we wanted to just kind of do a real-time syncing. We had that in our mind for over a year. And a week before the anniversary, we were just on Skype with the team and saying, well, the anniversary is coming up. We got to do something. And then we just went back and forth. We were all sort of thinking the same thing. Hey, let's do that real-time syncing. And then we said, sure. We jumped on it. And then only then did we get hit by the realization that it's 7 days from now. So we were throwing it together because we always do this real-time podcast during the syncing, right to the minute. And we talk about the syncing over that night. And we tell stories. We try to focus on it a little differently each year. We tell firsthand accounts. We explain what's going on. And we tend to have a couple hundred people listening in. And then we decided, well, let's just throw something together. We'll do a real quick, real-time syncing. We'll post it on YouTube, and we'll tell people to just watch it while we talk. And then the next morning, we'll take it down. And then we'll do a real good job on one later. Because we only had 7 days, and we did that. It was rough. It was rushed. There were some mistakes in it, and we put it up there. And we're talking on our podcast, and people are tuning in, and we're getting like 1,500 people. And during the 3-hour podcast, the news in the middle of the night at like 1 a.m., Fox 29 Philadelphia did a quick article saying people are listening to this right now, and it's really incredible. And they're watching this video. And then it kind of got picked up by a few others. And then by the next morning, it had 80,000 hits. And we were kind of annoyed, not ungrateful, but we were kind of annoyed because this was the rough one and we wanted to redo it better. because this was not the sample or a demonstration of what our quality of work actually looks like. But we didn't want to get rid of it because we had so many good views. And then by the end of the day, it had 1.2 million. And then the next day, we had 5 million views. Just 5 million additional ones in the following 24 hours. By the end of the week, we had 10 million. So it just exploded. We were doing interviews like the one we're in now. We were talking about it. We did some stuff with the BBC, the CBC, NBC, CNN. There were all sorts of interviews and press given to us, and it was really exciting. We were happy to see it because a lot of people were tuning in. And of course, we always had some people saying, why would I waste my time watching 2.5 hours of a ship sinking? But we were really happy because most people were appreciating it. And of course, you're going to skip around. That's totally understandable. But you still get a good feeling of what that was like and what it really felt like. What makes it unique is the boring parts, the downtime when nothing is happening, because it makes the exciting, the terrifying moments where stuff really does happen, it gives it more gravity. It makes you understand that this is really unfolding. I'm really happy to say that a lot of our audience really appreciated that. And then we did another real-time syncing about the HMS Britannic, which was, I mentioned the Olympic was the near identical sister of the Titanic. Well, they had a third sister as well, which was never officially finished as a passenger liner. But when World War I broke out, the British Navy requisitioned it and then paid to have it finished as a hospital ship. So it looked just like the Titanic, but it was white and painted up like a hospital. And that also sank. So we did a real-time syncing of that, and it sank in 55 minutes. It doesn't have the attention Titanic itself has because it's not the Titanic, but it has, I think, 1.25 million views as well.
The thing that impressed me about the Britannic syncing that you recreated is that one felt sort of like a cross between your Titanic sinking and more of a constructed documentary. And here's where we get into the technical elements of what it takes to produce a full video game or simulation. You had voice actors who were reading passages from the journals of the crew and the hospital staff who were on that ship when it struck the mines and when it started sinking. And so there's less people who are running around screaming, partially because these are also people who have more discipline because of their training, but it fills that in with details that only those accounts could possibly provide. Having that is a very good piece to complement the Titanic real-time syncing and shows a good taste of what you're going to be delivering with this full game.
It's definitely a step in the right direction. With the Britannic, we had a little bit more time, but again, it was rushed. Because the thing is, we're always focusing on the game. We're always focusing on what we're supposed to be focusing on. But then these anniversaries come up and we feel obliged to do something. Unlike Titanic, where we had 1 week to do a 2-hour and 40-minute syncing, with the Britannic, we had a month. We managed to give ourselves a month in advance. And it was only a 55-minute syncing, but there was so much more that needed to be done. With the Titanic, we already had it built for the game. With the Britannic, it had to be built almost from scratch. We had to do a lot of new research, and then we wanted to add some special details. The voice acting was something new. Some of them were reading off journal entries or interviews that they gave to newspapers. So the sources are mixed. And some of the voices that you hear in it are actually just our own historians who are giving a bit of a narration, saying at this point, Britannic is starting to list 8 degrees to starboard. The captain turns its engines back on. It's trying to get over to the island of Kea in an attempt to beach it. So it's really a mix, and this is what we really wanted to do with the Titanic, and we would have if we had the time, and we hope to actually down the road. But it is a better demonstration of what our project's going to be in the end. It's certainly a better put together depiction of a real-time syncing. And the graphics are better because like I said, we put more effort in and we built it with more time and research.
From a general standpoint, what is everything that's going on with the development of it right now? Obviously, 3D modeling, and more 3D modeling. But what are some of the other aspects of the design that you're exploring right now as part of your team?
Right now, the biggest thing we need is an investor or investors. We are still plugging away at building the entire ship. It's actually a little bit of a blessing because once an investor comes along, they're gonna push us to cut corners and not put so much detail into slowly building the ship and making sure everything is right. They're gonna say, no one's gonna notice this. Move on. So we are taking advantage of this time right now to make sure we can build the insides like we want. But one of the biggest efforts is getting the money needed to produce this game and get it off the ground and make it the way we want, make it the way our fans want, and make it the way that it really deserves to be. So right now it's just modeling and business structuring. That's what we're focusing on right now. We did some demos. As you said, you've played the second one. There are 3. If anyone listening is interested in going to play them, the only one available right now is the third one, and the reason for that is because the first 2 were put into the third one. So you get the first 2 with the third one, and it's on our website. But what you really like about it is it actually opens up on a train. You ride into the Belfast Harbor, the shipyard where Titanic was built, Harland and Wolff shipyards of Belfast, Northern Ireland, or it was just Ireland at the time. And you ride in on this train from the time period. The train was a bit of a stretch. We needed it for cinematics. We're not going to take such liberties with the final game, but with a demo, we wanted to do something that will demonstrate this to possible investors and to the public, and we had to take a few liberties. So you ride in on the train, and you get off, and you have to explore the ship a little bit, and there's a narration going from the main character. I know that a lot of you guys are going to notice the train, so I'll mention a little bit about it. The train you're in is a Northern Ireland coach. It would not have gone down the shipyard as seen in that opening demo. That was dramatic license for us. And it's also not quite the perfect era. It was, I think, the 20s. But that was because we were talking to our train modeler. He was heavily focusing on the trains that would be involved in the final game. And I said, hey, surprise, surprise, instead of doing Southampton, I need an Irish train from the time period. So he gave me the best that he had available. We weren't cutting corners or anything, but we were under a time crunch because of a couple investors who wanted it done quickly, which is the perfect example of how once an investor comes along, we do have to expect to have to rush certain details. But as I was saying, check that out. You ride up in a train.
Part of what's really creative about how you've gone about your funding, so you're seeking investors, and certainly there's something to be said about having big fish investors, but you also have done online crowdfunding and donations. What got me, I think, were the different levels and rewards that you would provide for each financial level. I mean, your base level is just $1 and you're one of the rivets, but I loved the idea of filling up the return trip, having the return trip passenger log filled from New York to England, filled with people who donated a certain amount, and they could put their name or the name of a relative. I just thought that creativity was really nifty.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we know that Titanic was booking passage for its return voyage, the second voyage, the voyage that would have happened had the Titanic not sunk. We know that they were booking it, but as far as we're aware, that list just doesn't exist. There most likely would have been a copy of the list in the purser's office, and because we are building everything, we're going to need a fake list there. We thought it would be kind of a cool thing to do where where fans could go onto our website, contribute $50 or more. $50 gets you this perk. You get a copy of the game when it's done, of course, and you get a few other little bonus things. But the big thing is you get a cabin on this voyage. and you can add your name or a fictional name as long as it's appropriate and it's not infringing on any copyrights. And we've had a lot of people jump on this. I think there's about 2,000 cabins on the Titanic. The whole return voyage got booked so quickly that we actually had to open up the second voyage, the third voyage, and now that's what we're currently booking. I think it's about half booked, which is really incredible to see such an outpouring of support from our fans and people who want to see this happen, but also want to see their names in it and feel like they're a part of this. And this is absolutely fantastic for us. And we're getting a lot of creativity on the fans' parts, too. Some of them are coming up with interesting names. Some of them are just keeping their real names, which I personally prefer to do for myself. But they're adding titles. We've got all sorts of military ranks on board. We have all sorts of royalty and professors and doctors and duchesses. It's pretty cool to see all of this come together.
Along with all of this, because you're looking for investors and supporters and just having the ability to showcase the work that you're doing, you're working to get this out in the communities in whatever way possible. Something that struck me that was really nifty was this video on your channel where you took one of your demos into an elementary school. How did you pull that off, and what was the reaction from the kids and from the teachers?
Well, there's a very easy way I pulled that off. My mom was the principal. But we brought it in, we brought the computer in, we set it up, and we called down different students of different ages, and we brought down some boys and we brought down some girls, and they all had to get their parents to sign a release form, but they played the demo, they explored the ship. They talked about what they liked. They talked about what was interesting, both with the idea of the game, but also with exploring the Titanic, what they knew about the Titanic already, and then how seeing it and exploring it really changed their views or expanded their interest in history. And again, this was great because this is the goal of our game, to expand people's interest in history. And right there, I think we brought down like 10 kids, and they loved it. It just, in trying to prove a point, we managed to get 10 kids more interested in history. So that was a very exciting day for us. That's what we did. And it really kind of goes to show that video games can be used as a tool to educate, as well as preserve history and pay homage to those who were lost.
It's this world building that fascinates me as far as where simulators and virtual reality can go. Part of what your finished game is going to have is characters who the player character interacts with, most of these based on real people. You're going to get to know actual people through this based on the records, based on journal entries, accounts of surviving relatives. It's a whole world that you're getting to explore through that. And when I think about our attempt as rail fans and rail historians to try to educate the general public about what was the railroad like, what was it like when a railroad town was a railroad town and everybody was connected in some way. And I think about this idea about being able to walk around the world, just walk up to a random person and you hear them mention some detail in passing about who they are, what they did, or their connection to this entity. That, I think, is so key as far as making the history relevant and accessible and exciting for this generation and for future generations.
Oh, absolutely. And we're really trying to make this authentic as well, as you were saying. We've gotten a lot of wonderful support, and we're trying to use that support to bring further authenticity into this. Some of the voice actors who are going to play these characters are actually related to them, and they use family stories about how this person really was to enhance their depiction of it. So there's that little novelty of listening. Margaret Brown is one of the specific ones, you know, the famous Unsinkable Molly Brown. We have one of her relatives who wants to play her voice. She likes to mention to people that Margaret Brown doesn't actually sound the way that she's always depicted in the movies and from the musical. You know, they give her this rough Southern accent. She's loud. She's almost obnoxious in all of these depictions. But in reality, she had this very smooth upper class tone, and it was fake because she wanted to fit in with this society, but she talked like that on the Titanic. So this is going to be one of those things that's going to surprise a lot of people who are expecting that rough, strong woman from the South kind of voice, but this is more authentic to who she really was, and it's being played by her descendant. So we really are trying to use these people to bring their ancestors back to life in a way that everyone really gets to appreciate them, and maybe as a result, they'll get a few new role models even, which will be pretty cool.
So you're collecting all of this knowledge, and you're finding these great opportunities for publicity. One of the ones that's very recent is your simulator's appearance in a recent National Geographic documentary. And it seems to me that as you're putting this out there and you're gaining more traction, that people within the history community or who are looking up something from Titanic are recognizing your team as the go-to team, as these are the guys you need to talk to about this aspect of it to see the simulator. So how did you position yourself in a way to be able to make that happen, as well as some of the other opportunities to use the simulator in documentaries?
I wish I could say it's because we did this or it's because we did that. I really wish I could say we planned it that way. I mean, we wanted it to go that way, of course, but really what did it is just the quality of work that the team has been putting into it. It looks photorealistic. It looks authentic. We get some people who look at screenshots of our game and they say, "Oh, is that a photograph of James Cameron's set?" And they all think it's real. And because it's very well known and it's very common knowledge in the Titanic circle that all of our work is authentic, we wouldn't do something if it wasn't thoroughly researched. As a result, people turn to us. And because we have all of this CGI readily available, because we have these models, these animations basically ready to go, we get a lot of documentaries and crews coming to us saying, "Hey, can we work with you? And can you help us make our project look pretty cool?" That's where we're able to license certain things and help us out a little bit financially again as well. It wasn't anything we specifically did. It was just the quality of the work and the fact that we have very high standards on making sure that this is done right and this is done faithfully. And again, I have to throw credit where credit's due. That's the team. That's Matt and Kyle and our historians. So, this project wouldn't be anywhere without the amazing people constantly putting in their best effort the whole time.
Now, I have to ask this question, Tom, and I'm sure it's the question that you get asked the most, but I have to ask it because it was put forth by my creative producer, who's also my girlfriend. I have to ask, when is it going to be done? And I cringe at asking that because I know that there's so much work to be done, but it's going to be out there. So what are we looking at for a timeline?
I can't say just yet. It's going to be approximately 2 years from the final investment. That is what we're looking at. I wish I could say a date. I can't wait for it to be done for multiple reasons, but I really don't know. I'm sorry. It comes down to when we get the investor.
It seems fine to me, honestly. You've taken so much time to get to where you're at now, and I think a lot of people appreciate the fact that you're not cutting the corners and you're trying to do this to be the best it can possibly be so that this is as thorough a document as can be. And it seems like because that at this point, it's not a full-time job for you, if I understand correctly. It is something that you and your team are doing as side project to your other work. So the fact that you're able to work on this as you want means that everything you're doing for it is for the love of doing it and not for rushing out a product.
This is a labor of love, and it always has been right from the start. I mean, we want to make a career out of this, and, well, we're not trying to sound greedy or anything, but we would like to make a living off of this project. We would like to get a nice return for it, for our effort. But really, it is just a labor of love. It's not about the money. It's not about the attention it gets. It's about recreating something that every person we run into has an interest in. They're always interested in the Titanic. It's always... it's to varying degrees, but people are always perking up when they hear the Titanic, or they're excited to hear new things about it. So we're really just trying to create something that we've always wanted to see, and we feel that there's a lot of people out there who would love to see and experience. So, labor of love all the way.
As you've gone on this journey and talked with so many experts and living relatives, seen so many artifacts, met so many interesting people, what makes you most grateful about where you've come even today with this?
I got to say the people. That's what I'm most grateful about. Made some great friends along the way. I owe a lot to this project. Some of my best friends I've made in making this project. I got to meet a lot of people who are related to people I've always admired reading about in the story of the Titanic. I got to meet a lot of people I looked up to when I was younger, like Ken Marshall, the painter. I was always interested in art, and I always loved his works. And as I said, I met my girlfriend on one of the trips that we had to do to talk about this project. So I gotta say, it's the people, and it's the connections, and it's the relationships built just from making this game.
So if people want to learn more about Titanic, Honor, and Glory, the website is titanichg.com. You can download the demo. You can check out their videos, their other podcasts, their contribution page, which is how you can book your voyage, the third voyage of the Titanic. This is such a fascinating project, Tom. I wish you and your team the best of luck with it. Thank you for coming on the Roundhouse and sharing where you're at with it so far. I can't wait to continue to see it unfold. And I hope that my regular viewers and listeners can forgive me for going off on a tangent about a boat and see that there's a lot of takeaway points for what we're discussing about here as far as the significance of research and packaging that in a way that makes that relevant to non-rail fans or people who otherwise don't have as much interest in history so that they can connect with it. Tom, thank you so much.
Well, hey, Nick, thanks for having me here. Hey, would you mind if I did a quick shout-out, let people know where our Facebook and our YouTube page is?
Absolutely, go for it.
All right, well, on either Facebook or YouTube, just search Titanic, Honor, and Glory, and you'll find it. But on our Facebook, that's where we do our regular updates. We show screenshots. We say how the project's going. And on our YouTube is where we post our videos, and that's where a lot of the videos we talked about in this podcast are, and we have lots of showcase videos there, too. So just search Titanic, Honor, and Glory, and you'll find it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you, Nick.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse, we were talking to Bennett Levin, the owner of two Pennsylvania Railroad E8 streamlined diesel locomotives, which begged the question, what diesels would be leading your private cars? Loads of interesting responses, especially on Facebook. Here's a couple that I selected. First from John Schweitzer, the former Conrail E8s in the Executive Green Scheme. I would also look for an E8B unit for a true ABA set. Bennett actually ended up with the ex-Conrail E8s. So very interesting choice. A lot of EMD fans out there, a lot of Alco fans. But something different that I saw was from Australia. This from Brad Act. Double-headed V-Line A-Class diesels with HEP, all painted in V-Line Mark IV livery. Very interesting selection. And then a couple of comments from the roundhousepodcast.com. This from Mike Hune. Definitely a pair of Amtrak F40 PHs painted in Phase 3. Those engines epitomized Amtrak to me growing up. That's true. I think for a lot of people growing up in the 90s, Amtrak was the F40. And I think for a lot of people in the 21st century, Amtrak is the P42. Man, it's going to be a strange day when we start seeing P42s showing up in railroad museums. And this from Bob Loss. My private cars would have to be led by Alco cab units, particularly the freight engines, an ABA set of FA2s or an ABA set of FA1s. First class all the way. Couldn't agree with you more on the Alcos. Your question of the day for this episode is, what railroad would you want to experience in virtual reality? Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. And of course, we have links to social media on there. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we are on Patreon. So if you enjoy the show, and even if you just have a couple spare bucks, that you'd be able to help us bring the show to a larger audience and do bigger and better things, especially for 2018, that would mean so much. I appreciate you guys joining us here. And remember, as always, that the Roundhouse is our house.